Hello, students. When we talk about the French Revolution, we often think of big ideas, don't we? Ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity. But what if I told you that this huge, world-changing revolution was also sparked by something much, much simpler? Something as basic as the daily struggle to get a single loaf of bread. Today, we're going to explore how this fight for survival pushed the people of France towards a massive uprising.
Now, you might remember from our earlier lessons, the society in France before the revolution was called the Old Regime, and it was very, very unfair. This picture here shows it perfectly. The nobleman is like the spider, and the peasant is the fly, caught in his web. The third estate, which was almost everyone, had to pay all the taxes and do all the work. Meanwhile, the clergy and the nobility, the first and second estates, they lived with all the privileges. This deep injustice was like a ticking time bomb, just waiting to explode.
All right, so to really understand this crisis, we are going to look at 5 key areas. We'll start by seeing how France was getting more crowded and was still very unfair. Then we'll discuss the rising price of bread. This is a very important point. After that, we'll see what happened when the harvest failed. Then we will understand a crucial concept, the subsistence crisis cycle. And finally, we'll see how all this hunger and desperation led to riots.
Okay, let's start with our first section, a crowded and unfair France. You see, before the big crisis really hit, there were already serious problems building up in French society.
So, this term old regime, what exactly does it mean? Well, it's the name historians use to describe the society and all the institutions of France before the year 1789. It was this whole system of inequality that the people of France were determined to change.
Let's look at some numbers. In the year 1715, the population of France was about 23 million people. That was already a large number for that time.
Now look at this. By 1789, that number had jumped to 28 million. That's an increase of 5 million people. Just try to imagine, that's like adding many more mouths to feed every single day. This rapid population growth put a huge strain on France's resources, especially its food supply.
So, when you have so many more people, how does it affect daily life? Well, it hit people where it hurt the most, the price of bread.
It's a very simple economic idea of supply and demand. With more people to feed, the demand for food grains like wheat went up very fast. But the problem was the production of food grains, the supply, it just could not keep up with this demand.
So what happens when there isn't enough food for everyone? The price of bread, which was the main food for the poor, it went up rapidly. But here was the real problem. The wages of most workers, the money they earned, didn't increase at all. So the gap between the rich and the poor just kept getting wider. For a poor person, even buying a simple loaf of bread was becoming impossible.
As if things were not bad enough, another factor came into play, something that nobody could control: nature. A spell of bad weather was all it took to make a very difficult situation a complete disaster.
Just try to imagine being a farmer back then. You work hard all year on your fields, but then a drought hits and there is no rain. Your crops just dry up. Or a sudden hailstorm comes and flattens your entire field. This kind of bad harvest was a frequent problem in France, and it could ruin everything.
You see, these were not separate problems. They were all connected. One problem led to another, creating a terrible, repeating cycle of hardship. This is what we call a subsistence crisis.
So, what exactly is a subsistence crisis? It's an important term to remember. It's an extreme situation where the very basic things you need to survive, like food, are endangered. We are not just talking about being poor, we are talking about a real danger of starvation, where life itself is at risk.
Let's trace the steps of this terrible cycle. It all starts with step 1, a bad harvest. Now, if the harvest is bad, what happens next? Step 2, there's a scarcity of grain. There's not enough food. Simple. And when there's a scarcity, prices go up. Which brings us to step 3, rising food prices. Now, when prices are too high, the poorest people cannot afford to buy bread. This is step 4. And this leads to 2 very bad results. 1, people's bodies become weaker from hunger. And 2, in their desperation, they start food riots. Weak bodies get sick easily, which leads to disease epidemics. And the final, tragic result of this whole cycle, an increased number of deaths. This was the sad reality for many in France.
So, when you are trapped in this cycle of hunger, fear, and death, it doesn't just make you sad, it makes you angry. And that brings us to our final section, how hunger and anger exploded into riots.
Now, it's very important to understand that these revolts didn't just happen suddenly. Peasants and workers had protested against high prices and taxes many times before. But what was different this time was that the suffering was on a massive scale. The anger wasn't just in one or two places, it was widespread, all across the country.
And often, the bakeries became the center of this anger. Women, who were responsible for feeding their families, would wait in long lines for hours just for bread. When they found the prices were too high or the shelves were empty, their patience ran out. They would often storm the shops, believing that the bakers were hoarding grain to sell at a higher price later.
When the riots that started the French Revolution began, the main reason was very clear. As one source tells us, most people were protesting against the high price of bread. At its very heart, the revolution began with this simple, desperate demand to be able to feed your family.
So, in the end, this constant struggle for survival, these repeated subsistence crises, and this deep economic pain, it all created a very explosive situation. It created a society that was angry, desperate, and ready for a big change. This prepared the ground for the political storm of the French Revolution.
So, let's just quickly recap. A growing population, prices going up while wages stayed the same, and failed harvests. All this created a terrible subsistence crisis in France. This cycle of hunger and death made people so desperate that it led to riots for bread. And this leaves us with a very important question to think about. Can the basic need for food, can hunger and desperation push people to challenge the highest authorities, even their king? Something to think about.